Welcome to the Unraveling the Scriptures channel. 5 supernatural events occurred shortly after Moses' death, and they changed the course of history. After Moses was gone, nothing was normal again. Get ready, because what happened after his death will change everything you thought about this story. After leading the people of Israel for 120 years, Moses climbed Mount Nebo, looked out over the Promised Land, a land he would never set foot on, and died there. But what happened next is one of the most mysterious episodes in the entire Bible. The biblical text says that God himself buried Moses in a valley in the land of Moab. That's right, God personally conducted the burial, something absolutely unprecedented in Scripture. And the most intriguing part, no one has ever discovered the location of that tomb. The story becomes even more astonishing when we read in the small book of Jude, verse 9, that a fierce spiritual battle broke out right after Moses' death. The archangel Michael and Satan contended over the prophet's body. But why would Satan be so interested in that body? Scholars have proposed fascinating theories. One of the most accepted is that the devil intended to turn Moses' tomb into a site of worship, diverting God's people toward idolatry. Imagine the man who spoke face to face with the Lord becoming an idol. Others believe Satan claimed the body because of Moses' sin when he struck the rock instead of speaking to it as God had commanded. Perhaps the enemy saw this as a spiritual loophole, but Michael, the prince of the heavenly armies, did not back down. The struggle was so intense that he had to declare, "The Lord rebuke you." In the end, Moses' body vanished. God hid it so well that to this day, no archaeologist, explorer, or treasure hunter has been able to find it, and not for lack of trying. This mystery has lasted more than 3,400 years, but the story doesn't end there. Centuries later, in the New Testament, something astonishing occurs. Moses appears alive, speaking with Jesus during the Transfiguration on a mountaintop. How could someone dead for so long suddenly appear? This is yet another great mystery surrounding his death. For those who aren't religious, the question may remain, why hide a tomb with such care? Moses' death did not simply mark the end of an era. It was the beginning of a chain of supernatural events that would forever change the course of Israel's history. The disappearance of Moses' body was only the first sign that something extraordinary was about to happen. And if that already seems incredible, prepare yourself, because the day after his death, something even more astonishing shook the people of Israel. That morning, the impossible happened. The manna, the food that had fallen from heaven every day for 40 years, suddenly stopped. How would Israel survive now? It was as if, all of a sudden, heaven had closed its storehouses. On the morning after Moses' death, the Israelites came out of their tents as they always did, baskets in hand, ready to collect their daily food. But to everyone's shock, the ground was bare. No manna, just sand and stones. Panic quickly spread through the camp. How are we going to survive now? Was the question echoing everywhere. For 4 decades, that heavenly bread, a white substance with a mild honey flavor, had sustained millions. It was daily sustenance, tangible proof of divine provision. It required no farming, no labor, no harvest. It was simply food from heaven. But with Moses' death and the people's entry into the Promised Land, everything changed. The manna stopped the very moment they crossed the Jordan River. It was as if God was saying, "Now you have a land. It's time to cultivate it." The transition was drastic. A people used to living off direct provision from heaven now had to learn how to work the land. The routine of simply gathering food was replaced by plowing, planting, watering, and waiting. Agriculture, which had never been needed in the desert, was now essential. The shock was so great that many began to grumble against Joshua, the new leader. "With Moses, we had guaranteed food," they complained. "Has God abandoned us?" others questioned. But Joshua stood firm. He knew that the Promised Land was a land of abundance, of milk and honey, but also a land of responsibility. The era of daily miracles had ended. Now was the time to plant, to work, to conquer. The first months were the hardest. The people had to ration the little manna they had stored. Some faced hunger. Others, in desperation, returned to eating the same simple foods they had in Egypt. It was a deep cultural and economic shock. But then, something extraordinary happened. At the time of the first harvest, they discovered the land was truly blessed. The wheat grew taller, the fruits were sweeter, the olive trees produced more oil. It was as if the land itself was making up for each year of waiting in the desert. The end of the manna wasn't abandonment, it was transition. God hadn't left them. He was simply preparing them for a new phase. Moses' death marked not only the end of an era, but the beginning of a new stage where faith and labor would walk hand in hand. Still, many Israelites missed the manna. There was something profoundly special about receiving food directly from heaven. That daily provision wasn't just physical sustenance. It was a constant connection to the divine, a daily reminder that God was there, caring for every detail. With the end of the manna, that connection had to take new forms of faith. The relationship between God and his people went through a profound transformation. It was no longer a relationship of childlike dependency, but of mature partnership. God offered the land. The people, in turn, had to cultivate it. God still blessed them, but now they had to manage what they received with wisdom. As a memorial of that unique time, the last jar of manna was placed inside the Ark of the Covenant, a sacred relic, an eternal symbol that there was once a period when heaven fed the earth every single day. But that time ended with Moses' death, and that event brought a powerful lesson. The end of a miracle is not necessarily a sign of abandonment. Sometimes it's a sign of growth. Israel was ready to live a new chapter, one where faith wouldn't be revealed by waiting for bread to fall from the sky, but by trusting that God would bless the daily effort of working the land. And if that already seems profound, something even deeper changed with the death of Moses. The way God communicated with his people. Never again would anyone have a face-to-face conversation with the Creator, as Moses had. Imagine losing your phone signal right in the middle of a critical call. Now multiply that feeling by 1,000,000. That's how the people felt when Moses was gone. For 40 years, Moses had an unparalleled privilege. He spoke with God as a friend speaks to a friend. When questions arose, he climbed the mountain and returned with answers. When conflicts broke out, he entered the tent of meeting and came back with divine direction. It was like having a direct line to heaven. With Moses' death, that exclusive channel was closed. Joshua, the new leader, did not have the same level of access, and this triggered a crisis. How will we know what to do now? The people asked. Who will speak to God for us? Anxiety gripped the nation. Urgent decisions needed to be made: how to conquer the land, how to divide it among the tribes, how to resolve disputes. Without Moses, who would give them the answers? It was in this atmosphere of uncertainty that a new method of divine communication emerged, the Urim and Thummim. Two mysterious stones kept in the breastplate of the high priest. They functioned as instruments of divine revelation, offering simple answers, usually yes or no, for specific, critical questions. Moses' death thus marked the end of an era of visible miracles and direct conversations with God, but also the beginning of a new stage, a more mature faith, requiring effort, discernment, and continuous trust that God remains present, even when he speaks in new ways. Imagine the radical transformation from direct, detailed conversations with God to simple yes or no answers delivered through stones. It was like trading a smartphone for smoke signals. The people had to adapt, learning to ask questions that could be answered in binary form. But that was only the beginning. Over time, the prophets emerged, a new channel of divine communication. Unlike Moses, these men and women did not speak directly with God. They received visions, dreams, and messages that had to be interpreted. The process became more complex and often more confusing. This shift brought serious challenges. Many began to proclaim themselves prophets, but without Moses to validate their messages, how could the people distinguish the true from the false? They became vulnerable to deception. That's why criteria were established. Prophecies had to come true. They couldn't contradict the law of Moses, and they could not lead the people toward idolatry. The absence of direct communication also changed how the people related to God. Before, any problem was brought to Moses, who would return with a divine answer. Now they had to rely more on the written law and less on immediate revelation. The priests assumed a more central role. They consulted the oracles, Urim and Thummim, interpreted the law, and acted as mediators between God and the people. Religious authority, once concentrated in Moses, was now distributed among various figures. Curiously, this transition encouraged spiritual maturity. Without a constant spokesperson, the people had to develop a more personal connection with God. Individual prayer gained importance, and meditating on the law became essential. It was like leaving your parents' home and learning to walk on your own. Some scholars believe this shift was necessary to prepare the people for future challenges. If they remained dependent on a single mediator, they would never develop the spiritual maturity required. The death of Moses marked a turning point. It forced Israel's faith to grow. The impact was so profound that it shaped the entire course of later religious development. The model of prophets, priests, and sacred scriptures established after Moses became the foundation for many modern religions. And as if that weren't enough, the absence of Moses nearly triggered a civil war among the tribes of Israel. The crisis was so severe that it nearly destroyed the nation before it had even been fully established. Barely had Moses' body vanished, and Israel was already on the verge of internal conflict. It's no exaggeration, a civil war almost erupted and could have destroyed the nation in its infancy. The reason? An altar. It all began with the tribes of Reuben, Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. They had been granted land east of the Jordan River, back when Moses was still leading. The condition was clear. They could settle there, but only if they helped the other tribes conquer the rest of the promised land. And they did. They fought, honored the agreement, and after the victory, returned to their land. So far, so good. But then came the issue. These tribes built a massive altar by the Jordan River. When the other tribes saw it, they were shocked. How could they build an altar outside the tabernacle? It looked like rebellion, idolatry, a betrayal of God. Within hours, an entire army was assembled, thousands of armed men ready to attack their own brothers. The atmosphere was tense. Without Moses to calm the situation, no one knew how to resolve the crisis. Joshua, now the leader, was overwhelmed. The people were divided. Decades of unity forged in the desert seemed ready to collapse. But then something decisive happened. Instead of attacking, a delegation was sent, led by Phinehas, the son of the high priest. The question was direct. What does this altar mean? Are you betraying us? Are you abandoning the God of Israel? The answer was unexpected, and it diffused the tension. The eastern tribes explained, "We did not build this altar for sacrifices. It is only a memorial, a reminder. We feared that in the future your descendants might say to ours, 'You who live on the other side of the river are not part of Israel.' This altar is our proof that we belong to the same people." The explanation brought relief, but the episode left scars. It revealed deep cracks in Israel's unity. Without the unquestioned figure of Moses, each tribe began making decisions on its own. The process became more participatory, but also more chaotic. The era of centralized leadership had ended, and with it, the stability Moses once provided. Smaller conflicts began to emerge, disputes over land, water sources, and pastures. Each tribe sought the best for itself, and the spirit of unity that had sustained the people for 4 decades in the desert began to weaken. Joshua, sensing the imminent danger, called a great assembly with representatives from all the tribes. It was urgent to establish new pacts and rules. Without Moses, they needed to find new ways to preserve cohesion among themselves. It was at this meeting that the system of tribal elders was established. Each tribe would choose its own representatives, who would gather periodically to resolve disputes. Thus was born a rudimentary form of decentralized government. However, the trauma of the near-civil war left deep scars on the nation. The tribes located east of the Jordan were from that point on viewed with suspicion. Over the centuries, They were the first to fall into enemy hands and the first to lose their identity as Israelites. This episode clearly revealed the devastating impact of the leadership vacuum left by Moses. A charismatic leader, respected by all, was gone, leaving behind a people used to obeying without question. Now, they had to learn to talk, negotiate, and make political decisions together. The irony: Moses had prepared the people for 40 years to enter the promised land, but not to live without him. Perhaps he believed Joshua could handle it. Perhaps he never imagined how massive the void of his absence would be. The altar built at the end of the conflict was named Ed, which means witness. It remained for centuries as a somber reminder of the day Israel nearly destroyed itself, not as a symbol of unity, but as proof of the fragility of human relationships without strong leadership. And yet, the most surprising thing was still to come. Despite the crises and chaos, Israel achieved something extraordinary. It ceased to be merely a group of nomadic ex-slaves and became a firmly established nation. That transformation was only completed with the death of Moses. For 40 years, the people had lived as wanderers, without territory, without their own government, sustained by daily miracles, dwelling in tents in the desert. They were more a roaming religious community than a nation, but everything changed with the death of their leader. The first major transformation Israel faced was territorial. Without Moses' centralized leadership, each tribe had to take responsibility for its own portion of land. Joshua divided Canaan by lot, a wise method that avoided favoritism and prevented disputes. Suddenly, people who had never owned a home became landowners. Families who had lived in tents for generations began building stone houses. Nomadic shepherds became settled farmers. It was an unprecedented social revolution. However, the most profound change was political. The laws given by Moses at Sinai ceased to be merely religious commandments and became, in practice, the constitution of a new nation. Without Moses to judge and interpret every case, the people had to establish their own judicial system. Local judges arose, chosen from the elders of each city. For more complex disputes, regional courts were formed. In matters of national interest, a council of elders would convene. A blueprint for an organized legal system was beginning to take shape. The economy was also radically transformed. In the desert, everything had been shared. Manna fell equally for all. Offerings sustained the Levites, and commerce was virtually non-existent. Now, with private land, the concept of private property emerged. Markets began to appear, and Israel fully entered the economy of the ancient Middle East. Culturally, the impact was immense. A people who once lived in isolation in the desert now found themselves living among Canaanites, Phoenicians, and Philistines. They learned new technologies such as metallurgy, advanced construction, and navigation. The Hebrew language absorbed foreign terms, and even their cuisine became more diverse. Militarily, Israel went from being a disorganized nomadic mass to becoming a confederation of tribes with their own militias. Each tribe protected its own territory, but they would unite against common enemies, the seed of what would eventually become the army of Israel. Religiously, worship also became decentralized. Although the tabernacle remained in Shiloh as the spiritual center, local altars, regional sanctuaries, and scattered places of worship began to appear, something that would later cause serious issues, but in the beginning helped to affirm Israel's presence in the land. Curiously, all this transformation was only possible because Moses was no longer among them. His absence forced the people to mature, to make decisions for themselves, to get organized, like a child who only learns to walk when the parents let go of their hand. This period became known as the Era of the Judges, and it lasted around 200 years. It was a time marked by instability, victories, and failures. But it was during this time that Israel shaped its identity as a nation. The great irony of it all is that although Moses dedicated his life to forming a people, it was only after his death that Israel truly became a nation. Sometimes, the greatest legacy of a leader lies in knowing when to step aside, allowing others to grow and flourish. That is exactly what happened with Israel. From the ashes of Moses' loss, a nation arose, a people who learned to walk on their own, keeping alive the memory and teachings of their great leader, yet forging their own path. Now that you've seen how Moses' death completely changed the destiny of Israel, don't stop here. Click the video that's appearing on the screen and discover how King Chedorlaomer, the destroyer of Nephilim, the man who defeated 1,000 giants, an even more astonishing story awaits you. May God bless you. See you soon